The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Miniature War Games with Battle Games magazine, and also by the generous donations of you, the listener. Thanks to everybody for their continued support. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 140. To the Strongest, with Neil Shuck and Mike Hobbs, and guest Simon Miller. This show was recorded on February 16th, 2015. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. I'm Neil Shuck, and on this show I'm joined by Mike Hobbs. Hi Mike.
Hello again.
Hi, how are you doing? You alright?
Yeah, very well, thanks.
Yes, recovered from the shock of the of our last episode.
Yeah, you know, Halo was so last week.
It's looking nice though, isn't it? I mean, if you've listened to the show and you've been keeping tabs on the Spartan site, they're starting to put things like scale drawings up of how big some of this stuff is going to be and what have you. Mind you, I mean, you know, I know Neil was talking about it, but actually seeing some of this stuff, you know, and there's pictures that we can talk about, and we've even seen some stuff that still hasn't been published yet, and just kind of like side by side stuff with things like big and little ships.
Mm. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, I mean that thing that we can't talk about looks really interesting.
Indeed. And all being well, at some point in the non-too distant future, you know, we're going to be winging our way down to Shipton Valley to perhaps get even more information off Spartan. So obviously, when we do, we'll keep you informed. But looking forward to that.
Yeah.
In the meantime, it's as I say, I mean, you've kind of succumbed to Planetfall a bit, haven't you?
Yeah, I did. You know, I have to try really hard not to look at it because I do like me small scale sci-fi games. After listening to Neil chat about it, I thought, I'll just have a little look at some of the figures, and I thought they're actually quite nice. So I walked away with the 2-player battle box that they do.
All right, so that's Dingerenzi and Aquan?
Dictoroid. Or the Dictoroid, yeah. The Dictoroid and Aquins.
Oh, okay.
So I painted up the Aquins already, or Quarians. They're all done, and I'm just starting the Dictoroid faction now. But look, great figures, really nice, great resin as normal. And they always do. They always just put enough into a box that I don't get bored painting them.
Right.
Because normally I'll pick up an army and I'll get halfway in or a third in, I'll get fed up and I'll paint something else. But whenever I buy one of the Spartan game stuff, they just got enough in there. You know, it's just enough so I don't get fed up of painting them. And then when I get to the end, I think I want to paint some more, so I'll go and buy another box. And there's always, it just goes on.
Right. Okay. So these, so the way they, what do they call them?
Well, the helixes.
Helixes.
Yeah.
That's yeah. So these helix box sets are probably just mic sized.
They are just mic sized. Yeah.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Excellent. And of course, in the and probably since we last spoke, we also did Mike. I was going to say talk me into. He didn't really. Well, he may have done.
I just dangled it in front of you.
What, Conan?
Yeah. That's
on the last day. Yes. And you obviously saw. If you're on the Twitter feed, you obviously saw a little bit of back and forth and we managed to convince some of the people to come on board. Hello, Ken. Yeah, so I think we might be having a couple of people apologies on that one. Yes, that looks interesting.
Yeah, that's gonna be fun when it arrives. I'm gonna try and clear my painting deck.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to make a statement like that because basically I am going to hope. But yeah, it does look nice. I mean, as I say, I've had to go out and spend the princely sum of 99p and buy the complete Conan collection because it's been a long time since I've read any Conan novels. So I thought, okay, I'll grab that on Kindle just to kind of get my background reading up to speed.
Yeah.
Already I've been dissed for my lack of Conan knowledge. And the fact that I didn't realise that one of the special characters was in fact Red Sonja. But there we go. Although they couldn't say that.
It's not Red Sonja, it's a Valkyrie.
It's a Valkyrie, yes.
It just happens to be painted with red hair.
That just went completely over my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah. Never mind, eh? Right.
Yes.
Interesting times, and scenery is still going on, although we're coming to the end of it, and we've still got buildings to do, and actually what this show that we're recording here was bumped another one because last week we recorded a scenery show which we were chatting all about. We actually got Dave Luff on, and we were chatting all about the scenery we've made, and also we were talking with Mike Whittaker about various MDF buildings and this, that and the other. However, I think in the general scheme of things, this show is probably more of immediate interest. So we're going to publish this one first. And then the scenery show will hopefully arrive at the end of the month. But it just depends on timing and those other bits and pieces. But we'll see how we get on because the scenery show might even get bumped for the next show that we're recording if I get time to edit that one before the end of the month. Because we're finally getting to re-record the Sword and Spear show that yes, the infamous show that never was.
It's going to happen.
Is going to happen. Yeah, all being well, we're recording that week today actually. So looking forward to that. And the plan is to originally the plan was to get it out in the middle of March, but I know there's a few people who are very, very keen to hear that. So depending on timing and schedules and those other bits and pieces, I may I'll try and get it out earlier, and you may forgive me if it's a couple of days later. So we'll see how we go anyway. Anyway, on to today.
Yes.
Right, in a few minutes, you'll hear a interview that we recorded the other night with Simon Miller, who's a podcast listener and also author of To the Strongest, New Ancients Rules, and a thoroughly nice chap.
It is. Yes.
But just before we do that, I think I've been promising for a couple of shows that I need to get organised and do some shout-outs. Basically because we've had some very kind people who've donated to the show, some people more than once, and I've not had a chance to thank them on air. So, in no particular order, but thank you to Frank, Alex, James, Glenn, and Ludo. Thank you to indeed, yes. Thank you to you all for generously donating to the show. Really appreciate your support, and thank you very much.
Yeah, cheers, guys. It helps.
It really does. Yeah. Thank you.
Pays hosting fees, means that Neil can save up and buy that gold Rolls Royce he's always wanted.
What, you mean the 1/100 scale one?
If you're lucky.
No, we really appreciate it. Thank you guys, really do. Right, okay. So on that though, what we'll do, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be chatting to Simon Miller. I'm very well pleased to welcome to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast, Simon Miller. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Neil. How are you?
Oh, wow. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well indeed, thanks.
It's good to have you on the show. Last time we spoke was, Other Partisan, wasn't it?
It was, yes. I remember you were sat by the side of the enormously long Pidna table where we were fighting our big ancient battle.
Yes, I mean, for those people who were at the Other Partisan last year, yes, that was that table that was difficult to miss because it took up half the hall and was at a rakish angle, wasn't it?
Yes, it was a steep table rising to one side. A little precarious at times, I felt, but it didn't fall down.
I must admit, that's the first time I've seen it. Well, I think it's the first time I've ever seen anybody do that kind of thing. Well, okay, we're fighting on the side of the hill, so tell you what, we'll just tilt the entire table.
Really?
Oh, really?
Yeah. 18-foot long tilted table. It came out of an idea I was trying to work on. I've always fancied doing. There's a Roman versus Britain's game at Manchester where Boudica got defeated, and I want to do that one day quite big. But I haven't really got any remaining storage space in my house, so I haven't got anywhere I can store hills. And anyhow, the sort of hills you put on a war games table just don't look big enough to be hills. So the only conclusion I came to was that one would have to tilt the entire table, and it worked. It was probably the biggest hill ever in a display game. I'm putting my.
No, I'll go with that. I don't think I'd, as I say, in my experience of seeing display games, that's probably one of the most unique ways I've seen of doing it. It wasn't a slight incline either. It was, it was a good few inches from one side to the other. Rock was, what was it, about 4 or 5 inches or something?
Yeah, I think it rose about 5 or 6 inches at the back. Of course, the other hill at the same place is Keren. I've just disproved myself on this one. Keren was a huge hill, a positive amount, didn't they? I think
James Morris's.
Yeah, that's just astonishing. Astonishing.
Yeah. Where the defender has a stand in a box behind and just sort of peek over the top, didn't he?
Oh yes, that one. Yes.
Look over the top. That is a hill, actually.
Yeah.
Think of it. If mine was a hill, theirs is a mountain.
We've got Simon on this evening to talk about his recently published set of rules called To the Strongest. But as everybody who are regular listeners know, whenever we get a new guest on the show, the first thing we do is find out a bit about their gaming background and how they got into this wonderful hobby. So, Simon, how on earth did you get started in wargaming?
Well, I mean, I've always liked toy soldiers. Apparently, my mother was telling me when I saw her recently that when I was still in my buggy, she went past a toy shop and had some toy soldiers in the window, and I pointed at them, and she bought them, and that got me started. And I must have been very young if I was still in my buggy, so presumably from 1 to 2 years old. And then I went through the classic wargamer born around 1960 approach with lots of airfix soldiers, plastic Britons figures, action men, then gradually escalating into the early minifigs. I was quite big into minifigs, Napoleonics. I think my first proper army was an airfix plastic Roman army, and then my first metal army were the minifigs and Napoleonics, some of which I've still got. Then I went away to university and I had a fairly long gap in my proper wargaming career when I got into role-playing. For a very long time, I got into D&D and then eventually RuneQuest. And funnily enough...
RuneQuest. Now there's a game you don't hear much about these days.
A fantastic game.
It is. It was a great game, wasn't it?
Much better than D&D.
Well, yeah, I liked D&D and I liked RuneQuest. Quite different, really. The RuneQuest background to their world was fantastic, so realistic, so believable, I felt, and it all really sort of tied in well together. In fact, I still have a bit of an interest in RuneQuest. It was kind of got me back into wargaming, really, the RuneQuest proper, because having played RuneQuest as a role-playing game, I got involved with a bunch of friends. We started playing Hordes of the Things, but set in the RuneQuest world with RuneQuest themed armies. And then one day, whilst buying figures on eBay for my RuneQuest armies, there were these very tempting looking Romans there, and I bought them, and then I bought some more Romans and some more Romans, and it kind of took off from there, really, my modern hobby. So for about the last 10 or 11 years, I've been collecting 28mm Ancients figures predominantly. You know, perhaps half of the figures of that Pidna game are mine, and I have quite a lot of other armies as well.
I was going to say, if that game was anything to go by, you have quite a few.
Yes. I'm sometimes a bit worried about the structural integrity of the house. There's a lot of lead actually in one of the kids' bedrooms. I mean, I think it's all right, but there's a wall of figures in there.
Oh, right, it's one of those things that every so often you just look up the ceiling and going, I really hope that joist holds.
Yeah, and then there's the loft. The loft is pretty full of my unpainted lead, and I've got a lot of figures in Foundry figures in the Foundry cartons in my dining room on top of a cupboard, and every 6 months or so, whilst getting some figures out of there, the whole stack shifts and I get a shower of lead figures falling on me from above. So yeah, there's lead pretty much everywhere in the house.
Okay, so is it just primarily Ancients you do, or do you do any other genres these days?
Well, Ancients is my main thing, and I basically there I'm working from the sort of classical era Greeks through to mainly the late Roman Empire and the barbarian migration. So that's where I am for Ancients. 3 or 4 years ago, I had another unwise eBay purchase of a few Napoleonic figures.
That never ends well.
And I've got my main blog. It's called the Big Red Bat Cave. That's where my ancient stuff is. But I have a less well-known blog called My Very Own Spanish Ulcer, because like Napoleon, I have real problems with my Napoleonic figures. They eat into my ancients collecting time, and they eat my wargaming budget. But I do love them.
Okay,
So,
and what scale's that?
28mm. I'm all 28.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah.
Right. So as some people who have been on this podcast before, we're in 28mm. So it's it's a few guys taking a flag for a walk, as some people would describe it. But I'm sure yours look better.
Oh no, no, I don't do. They're not especially small units. It could be quite a few guys taking a flag for a walk.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah,
So where do you game all this stuff? Are you one of these people that has got something like a 24x6 table stashed in the garage or something?
No, I've got a dining room table, but it is a big dining room table. It's about it's about 10 foot long by about 3.5 foot wide. So I can play down there with a bit of imagination. I can get up to a 12 foot long by 4 foot deep table on. And I quite often play at home, probably about once a month now. I used to play more like once a week at home. These days, I probably don't play quite as much as I used to, partly because I've been very busy with the rules that we're going to talk about in a minute, with the painting of the figures and with big display games at shows and tournament type events as well. So on average, I probably play about 1.5 times a month now, I'd say.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. I live in North London, Muswell in North London. There aren't a lot of clubs around in the immediate area, so it's mostly a question of getting my friends organised and getting together. And you know what it's like; it can be quite difficult to get everybody in a place for a game. Which again was, fun enough, was one of the drivers for the rules that I've written. In that you've probably got about 1.5 to 2 hours to play a fairly large game, and you need to have rules that enable you to complete it in that time.
Okay, which amazingly segues quite nicely into our next question.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about what we wanted to talk about obviously is this set of rules called To the Strongest.
Yes.
New set of ancient, relatively new set of ancient swords. They came out back end of last year, didn't they?
Yeah, late November.
You've already kind of hinted at some of the reasons for coming up with two of the strongest.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's almost every wargamer's ambition to write a set of rules at some point. I mean, some people are content to kind of put their own different house rules on various rules that they purchased. So, what made you turn around and go, right? Okay, I want to write my own rule set.
There were a few drivers that really came together on it. Firstly, I want to play games that I can finish in an evening's play. We used to play Command and Colours a lot. The hex board game.
Yeah.
Enjoyed that a lot.
Big favourite, yeah.
Yeah, and we moved over and we shifted to playing that with figures. And for a long time, I found that very satisfying.
There you go, Mike. Excuse me 1 second, Mike. There you go. You can chat to Simon and get Mark involved, all on Commands and Colours and playing it with figures, mate.
Stop tempting me.
So, separately, me and Mike have been having a conversation, funny enough, all about Commands and Colours.
They're trying to tempt me into these big board games, and I'm really trying hard not to weaken.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a terrific game, and for quite a long time it addressed a lot of what we really wanted from a game to play in an evening, especially if you're just playing it with the wooden blocks. You can play maybe 2 games in an evening. You could play a game and then switch around and play the other side. But there were a few things about it that didn't ring quite right. The lack of flanks really for units and rear. Units can face in all directions effectively.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant game, but it's not quite a war game.
Yeah. It certainly shows off its board game roots, and there's a couple of things where there have been things where people have done house rules for things like facing and various other bits and pieces.
Yes. The other thing about it is because it's on hexes, it's very easy to advance at an angle. In fact, you pretty much have to advance at an angle. So we found that in a lot of the games, one of us we'd always be attacking sort of in echelon towards one side of the table. Whereas in a lot of ancient battles, things just piled straight forwards. That's kind of why I decided I wanted to move to a square grid rather than a hex grid. Also, square grids are really easy to draw. If you want to run a tournament and, you've got, the one we had recently were 5 or 6 tables, I was drawing up the square grids in about 15 minutes each. But hex grids are not easy to... It's possible to draw them. They're just a bit cumbersome and time-consuming, and not for the faint-hearted.
That's it. I mean, unless you want to invest in lots of hex on terrain, which I'm sure Callisto would love you to do.
Yes.
But yeah...
I'd quite like to have quite a lot of that hex on terrain. It's great stuff.
But as you say, unless you want to do that, or there's a company that now produce mats specifically for Command and Colours and stuff like this. But
like the HOTS mats.
That's the one.
Yeah, I've got some of those when we used to play. Good product. Yeah, good product.
They do look nice. And but unless you do something like that, as you say, trying to make them up yourself. When we did it at club, it was a bit problematic, and marking out a 6x4 board means that's fine, but then it has to be double-sided, and you can only use one side, and then you've got to be it's like it's a lot of hassle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So that was one of the drivers. Anyhow, was that I wanted a quick game. I wanted a grid. Part of the thing about wanting a grid was. Having played Command and Colours, I was a bit spoiled and didn't really want to go back to games with a lot of measurement. If you're playing a game that involves a lot of measurement, you're spending a lot of the evening leaning over the table with your measuring implement of choice and looking at the different possible places the unit could move and measuring the different distances and moving the unit there and sometimes moving it back and moving it somewhere else. It does slow a game down.
I was going to say, and plus the fact, it seems that in an awful lot of Ancients games, almost a third of the rule book is taken up with the movement phase because of all the things you have to worry about with
wheeling,
wheeling and everything to do with that, and it does seem that an awful lot of time is used to concentrate on that. When you said that, it makes an awful lot of sense that you spend a lot of time moving figures.
And you get some gamey things happening sometimes. Do you remember I think it was in DBA, or possibly Hordes of the Things, there was a tactic called Buttocks of Death, where you moved your unit slightly past the enemy unit and positioned the back of your unit to the back corner of the enemy unit, so the enemy unit couldn't recoil. And then you hit the enemy unit with another unit, made it retreat, and it died.
Yes.
There were some unusual tactics have been caused by wheeling. I don't think Caesar would have been said, just slide your cohort just past the enemy there and put it at a slight angle with the back positioned towards the enemy, and it'll all be okay. Just don't see it happening. So I just got really frustrated with measurements and with the little widgets, the little metal widgets you use for calculating angles and arcs of fire that have to be precision engineered. That's a bit much for me, I think. So, all for an easy life. It's amazing what you can do with the grid.
Yeah,
I mean, the game's really rockets along. That was another driver for it. We didn't really want to get involved in. We didn't really want to get involved in a lot of games that involved measurement. So I basically came up with the concept of the grid-based game, and I spent about 6 months on a version of it that used 2 dice to activate a unit. We might talk about activation in a minute. But the real breakthrough came when my friend and I were talking about a game that could be played by non-war gamers and kids. And I had the idea of using playing cards instead of dice to make the units move. For activation, I guess you're talking about the equivalent of the D6, the D6 dice that you throw in DBA at the start of a turn, or the pair of dice you throw in, I believe, in War Master and Hell Caesar and some of those games. Quite a lot of the games revolve around activating a command of 3 or 6 units to do something.
Yeah.
The idea I had was to activate individual units within a command, and the mechanism I decided to use was the playing card. And funnily enough, I managed to get a 1 page of A4 set of rules that made for a quick game that you could play in about an hour and a half. It was quite entertaining, not particularly complex, and I've spent the last 2 years developing that really into to the strongest.
it's quite funny when you say that, because there's quite a few people we've spoken to who produce new rules that basically said the same thing. They they get their basic ideas onto 1A4 and that's it, and then spend the next year or so basically fleshing that out, and suddenly you end up like a 60-page document. So it's amazing how many rules do actually condense down to that classic one page of.
It's to the strongest I think of as a 250-word set of rules with 44,000 words of additional explanation.
Yeah.
Hang on a second. So you developed a set of rules
Yes.
that doesn't use measurement and doesn't use dice.
Yes.
Doesn't sound like a proper war game to me.
Yeah.
And
it's funny
discuss.
enough. I mean, it's skirting the cusp of board games, but I don't know. For me, it will always be a figure game. I mean, I wouldn't rule out at some point doing a sort of board game version of it. One could play. What would work very well actually is if we got some head-down views of units printed, maybe about 3 or 4 inches across, and produce those in packs that people could then play a game on a big table, a dining room table or a bigger table.
Funnily enough, have you ever seen a battleground fantasy warfare? And they also did a version called Battleground Historical Warfare, which was based on the Punic Wars. Now, it was they basically went, okay, this is a figure game without the figures, and what they actually did was that they printed all their units as top down cards. I mean, they kind of credit card sized.
Yeah, Yeah,
Units
I have seen. I think I've seen pictures of that online.
but they do a full Punit War set. Well, the sound of things would be absolutely ideal as like a travel set for something like this.
They've also done Alexandrian as well, and also Blucher is a similar concept.
Blucher, I was going to say Blucher, which of course is just coming out recently, is very much along the same lines with the units. I believe I haven't actually seen the cards, but I presume they're head-down views of Napoleonic formations.
Pretty much so, yeah. I think they are.
It's on my shopping. It must be. It's
Yeah.
on my shopping list. I'm really interested.
I am intrigued. I'm intrigued by that because I think Sam Mustafa writes some very interesting rules. I played several of his sets, and most recently Longstreet, which I thought was very good. Very good campaign mechanics to Longstreet too. So you're right. It's not a million miles from a board game, but it is. For me, it will always be a figure game, and I mean, it does give me the excuse for getting. I'm able to get a lot of my figures on a table for an evening's play in about 2 hours. I can use a lot of figures, or at a show, I can use. I can put 1,000 or 1,500 figures on a table and get some mates to bring as many again, and you've got a terrific visual spectacle then.
As I say, on that one. On the show, the Partisan, there was,
Yeah.
did we say just under 3,000 figures on the table or something like that?
I think it was probably just over 3,000 at the end. I think we had about 9 players playing and about 3,000 figures, and we finished the game, I think, from memory, in about 2.5 hours. It's written in the rules somewhere. I mentioned how long it took, I think.
With 9 players playing?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So immediately, something else that we've got here is the fact of it incorporates multiplayer just kind of as standard, yeah?
Absolutely. So I spent a fair bit of time. Okay, I came at the set of rules initially from the set of rules that would enable me to play games with 3, 4, 6 players, 8 players at a show with very large armies. Obviously, most people, that isn't a typical person's gaming experience. Most people are playing their mates across a 6x4 table, either at home or in a room above a pub, with a couple of hundred figures. So I took it down from the huge games of the shows to enable you to play a game on a 6x4 with a couple of hundred figures, maybe 150 a side, 100 a side, because that's what people are going to really, really want for their everyday gaming experience. But at the same time, you can scale it up from that to play a game of almost any size. I've wondered what the theoretical maximum size for a game might be, because the way that it works with the players is they're pretty well self-governing and they can do their own thing. You just need to basically, as the umpire, you just need to tell them when the turn is going. It's I go, you go. Very simple mechanics in that sense, deliberately. So you just say, okay, it's the Ptolemaic turn for, say, Raffia. All the Ptolemaic players move, and the opposing Seleucid players react to their move. And then when you think just about everybody's finished, you shout, okay, that's the end of the turn, now it's the Seleucid turn. And all the Seleucid players sort of move, and they're not dependent upon each other, really. They can play individually. So it's almost like, I guess, 5 or 6 pairs of war games going along the length of the table. And there isn't really a limit to how many people that you could have playing. You might need a megaphone for the longer table, I guess. But I would like to... Something I do want to try out over the next few years is seeing how bigger war games we can actually run. Because those ancient battles were really long. The battle lines for the biggest ones might be 2 or 3 miles long. In the film of Alexander, you see that tiny, thin ribbon of troops stretching miles and miles across the landscape. Well, you don't tend to see that very much in wargaming, but it could look like that if you were to run Guagamela, for instance, at a show with enough players and a long enough board. So watch this space. It's probably something I'll be revisiting in the next year or two.
If we're kind of converting that into, and looking back at your rules, when it comes down to things like game scale and stuff, I mean, is that really flexible?
Yeah.
it's element based, isn't it? So is it very much a case of, well, it's completely flexible depending on the engagement, or did you really have one element was a cohort or what have you? What did you kind of have in mind as far as that was concerned?
Again, I think like a lot of rules these days, it is fairly flexible. Firstly, because it's based in a grid, a player can use as few or as many figures to represent a unit as he wants, and they can be based for any system. So, we've got a system now where my figures, which are all based on the old WRG frontages at least, can fight figures based for WAB, or indeed figures on round bases. It really doesn't matter. As long as it looks visually convincing for both sides, you can base the figures how you want. In terms of the unit sizes, I tend to use about 5 units to represent a Roman legion. So my units are roughly 2 cohorts each. So typically 2 in the front line, 2 in the second line, 1 in the third line sort of arrangement. When we're doing Polybian warfare, again, we have a similar number, around about 100 figures to a legion, but they're actually in 4 lines usually, and we use smaller units for those to reflect the maniples of the Polybian legion. But you don't have to use that many figures, and although I'm pretty much exclusively 28mm myself, we've played it quite a bit in 15mm with one of my friends' collections. I'm working on a 2mm army for like a travel set. We were talking about travel sets earlier on. I've got some nice old irregular miniatures for Macedonian phalanxes and Persians. I'm making myself up a magnetic travel set of those. So it really is pretty flexible. The ranges don't tend to be as long as you see in a lot of games. Most of the missile weapons can shoot 1 box or 2 boxes. To give you a rough idea, a lot of people play with a 6-inch grid because it's easy to mark. It gives you the right number of squares on a 6x4 table. Javelin range is 1 box, so they could shoot really up to a maximum of 6 inches, and bow range is usually 2 boxes at 12 inches, although there are weapons with longer ranges, your longbows, and of course artillery.
Before we go sort of too far into the sort of rules mechanics, it might be an idea to step back.
Yes.
And basically say, so this, to the strongest, is an ancient game for large battles where you as a player, you're taking on the role of the commander, and you've got a group, or you have multiple groups of, let's call them divisions, beneath you, each with their own general. Is that right?
That's it, yeah. You've usually got 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 commands under each player.
And obviously those commands are given their own objectives, but the scenario is basically, it's an open battlefield usually with ancients, because that's pretty much how they fought, wasn't it? They look for a nice flat surface and then all got together for a good old-fashioned scrap.
On the whole, although if your enemy's pike phalanx, you might like a nice surface with lots of houses. or of course, if you're the Spanish, you probably want to be up the mountain.
chucking rocks down. Yeah,
but on the whole, you're right. Yeah. Generally, the battlefields are fairly flat.
As soon as I said it, I had visualizations of all the battlefields that weren't flat and weren't mountainous, all just pop into my head. So, as you say, the table is laid out with these grids, and then each grid holds a certain number of units. Now, is there any rules on there on how many units you can fit into a box?
Yeah, the maximum number of units you can have in a box is 2, one behind the other. And if one of your units is what we call a deep unit, like a pike phalanx, then the other unit can only be a unit of light infantry. It's quite good to have the 2 units in the box because it makes more use of the depth of the table. Because if you only have 1 unit to a box,
it always becomes like playing chess, then, doesn't it? I suppose.
It's 2 units works very well. Although it took a little bit of writing the rules to actually get it to work, because obviously they have to face in the same direction, and you need rules for covering recoiling and things like that.
Okay. And does it matter how the units are placed in the box? I mean, do you have, for example, say I had a unit of skirmishers with a unit of pike behind them,
Yeah.
and that box was attacked from the front, would the skirmishers then take the first attack? Or
Yes.
could
Yeah.
if they do? Okay, so
Yeah. There's what we call the leading unit and the following unit.
okay, so
In
the
most
position of how you place the units in the square does
Yeah.
have an impact on the game. Excellent.
Yeah. For instance, if you're in the circumstance you explained, if your skirmishers were attacked, then they can evade behind the pike phalanx within the same box, and the two units just exchange position within the box. But yes, you're right. It is the order of the two units is really important.
Because that then moves you from being a fairly standard grid-based game. Because there are other games out there where you put everything into the square and you just basically you attack the square. But this way you are adding a bit of tactical engagement in how you set your armies up. And I suppose by having it in a grid, it does allow you then to have the long lines, which is what you normally saw with these great big long lines with reserves behind and reserves behind them.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you within the system, if you're playing the Polybian Roman army, your line might be 2 boxes deep, but the front box has the unit of Velites and Hastati, and then the rear box has the Principes and the Triarii behind that. And but with the pike phalanx, you've generally just got that single unit, but we tend to use as many figures as we have available. So we had like a six or 8 figure deep phalanx, I think, at the Pydna game.
So it almost becomes that the grid almost becomes your zone of control for the elements inside each square, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And the units project a zone of control out into the box directly in front of them, which to an extent determines what enemy units in that box can do.
Yeah. So I'm guessing what you're doing is by pushing it up to that level and saying the movement is quite basic and the way they're fighting is is simplified. You're taking away the micromanagement that you see in a lot of ancient games, where we said with things like wheeling and moving obliquely. You're basically saying, right, this is the zone of control. You hold that part of the battlefield. I don't get how you get there. That's up to the general to sort out, or the commander of that unit to work out that micro detail. They just got to get there and hold that piece of ground.
Yes. I think that's true to say. Yeah, it's very much so. You don't have to agonise about the angle that your unit is at, or whether the enemy are just going to sneak just past you. I mean, it's pretty clear. Well, it's very clear where your unit is, where the enemy unit is. If you've got an open flank, it's pretty clear you're in trouble, as it is in a lot of rules, I suppose. It's nothing if not clear. There is, however, the activation system, which we've not talked about yet, does introduce a good deal of uncertainty and interest to the game.
Well, let's cover that now then. Because what I found when I was playing the game was the activation is nice and simple, but God, it makes you think. And
it does.
It's all about
it does. So
when you do things.
Do you want me to just talk through how that works?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. It's I think it makes it makes it quite an unusual game because activation is by unit. Okay, so you're Caesar and you're running the Roman centre of whichever battle it is. You activate one general and his command, and that's usually 3 to 6 to 8 units, usually about 3 or 4. So you've got all the units laid out in front of you, and you've got a big deck of cards in your hand. You've got 80 playing cards usually, which is 2 decks of cards with all the court cards taken out and the jokers taken out. So you've got 80 cards consisting of 8 aces, 8 twos, 8 threes, 8 fours, all shuffled together. So you decide which unit you want to move first, and then you play a card to activate that unit to move. Now, in general, anything but an ace will activate that unit to move. So you might play a 4 on that unit, and that would mean that the unit can, so let's say it's an infantry unit, it might advance forward 1 box. that would be a move. Or if there's an enemy unit adjacent to it, it might charge that unit.
Okay, so can I just clarify something here? So
Yeah.
This is first off, doesn't matter on suit.
So
Does suit matter? Does
suit
card
isn't,
suit
no,
matter?
no, suit doesn't matter at all. I did think about doing things with suit, but particularly in a big game, it gets a bit complicated. You can just about cope with the number on the card.
Okay. And secondly, you're playing off the top of a deck as opposed to playing from a separate hand.
Yeah, you're just playing straight off the top of a deck.
Okay.
It's not a game where you build up a hand of cards, and those are good games. I'm not knocking them. It's just a different approach. Effectively, you can think of your playing cards as a very flat D10. You could play the game with a D10. And in fact, I was talking with a guy in America that was using D10s to do it. But there are two good things about the playing cards. There are three. Firstly, they're big and clear. There's no small dice getting stuck in gullies on the table or bouncing off the figures and rolling on the floor. Your cards you can see, and everyone can see them because they've got big numbers and marks on them. It's really obvious what you've played. The second thing is that you can leave the cards behind the unit as a record of what that unit's done that turn, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. And the third thing is playing cards turns out to be really exciting. There's a lot of pleasure in chucking the card on the table and trying to get the right card behind a unit to do what you want it to do. And I'll explain about that again in a second. So you've got your infantry unit there, and each unit there are 4 different things it can do. It can move, it can charge, it can shoot, or it can rally. Those are the 4 different sorts of activation. So a simple move might be to move forward 1 box, or to move diagonally. That's called a difficult move. And I won't go into that now, but you have to basically get 1 higher pip than you'd otherwise need. To shoot, you play an activation card, get anything but an ace, and then you play another card on your baseline to hit the enemy unit. That has to be an 8 or higher. When you're charging, you play a card to charge. Your unit doesn't enter the box that the enemy unit's in. The melee is across the box boundary. It's between the two.
All right, so it's not like chess where you're attempting to take a square. It's like as soon as you come into effectively orthogonal contact with the unit. Yeah,
it's basically I've tried to model a sort of a pulse model of warfare.
Right.
Units don't get locked into the combat. They get semi-locked, I suppose, because they have zones of control that sort of influence the other unit. But to attack an enemy unit, you have to exhort your troops to charge and play the right card, and then they charge, and then you get a chance to hit the enemy unit by playing another card on your baseline, and you need to get a 6 to hit with that. If you hit, the enemy has to save. If the enemy survives and isn't killed, then he gets to hit you back, and then you may have to save. Now, that sounds complicated, but you can actually resolve a melee, I say in the rulebook in 10 seconds, but quite often we're resolving melees in 5 or 6 or 7 seconds in a flurry of playing cards hurtled onto the table by the different players.
Yeah, I suppose there you haven't got this thing of much as wargamers across the world love rolling dice. The physical act of having to pick up and roll dice. You were talking about how much time you save by not having to measure. Again, this whole thing of rolling dice, actually, gathering your dice together and rolling them and sorting out and everything else. It is quite time consuming, isn't it?
It is, and card play turns out to be really, really fast. I was worried it was going to slow the games down, but it really does speed them up. Also, to the strongest, it's fairly brutal. Units have 1, 2, or 3 hits, and once you run out of hits, you're a dead unit. There was one demo game I was running once where I was showing the players how it went, and in the first 10 seconds of play of the battle, 1 unit was killed. unit advanced, it attacked, it killed the enemy light unit. The enemy light unit had to make a save, and then it died and was taken off the table. They look stunned because you don't tend to see that in a game. Usually there's a build-up to it. But in this particular case, we were straight in, and this unit got killed. I mean, their jaws dropped. It was fun. So anyhow, you've got a card behind your unit, and it's gone off to. You've activated it to do one of these things, and that activation's complete. You can then decide whether you want to activate the unit again to do something else, or you want to activate another unit in your command within that same command. So let's say you want to activate the cohort next to it, then you play another card on that, and anything but an ace, and that cohort will go forwards. And you can activate all the units in your command, or you could return to the first unit and make it go again. And to make it go again, you just have to play a higher card than the one you played before.
Right, okay.
If you play the same card or a lower card, then that command's turn ends, and you can't activate any of the other units in that command in that turn.
Right, so there is an element of pushing your luck when you're doing this then?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, there is.
That's it. And the skill in the game really is in terms of balancing, making the decisions about what the most important things that you want to achieve that turn for that command are. Whether you want to push one unit, push your luck by maybe getting one unit to attack 3 times, because you could attack 3, 4, 5 times if you were very lucky against a single enemy unit by repeatedly activating the same unit. But on balance, it's usually better to activate most of the units in the command once before you actually start activating units a second or third time.
Yeah.
There's one exception to the rule about playing a lower or equal card. If you have a general in the box and you play a lower or equal card, that general allows you to replay a card. So generals become the positioning of your general becomes quite important within the command. He needs to be in the place where he needs to be in the key place. If you're planning to attack with a unit 2 or 3 times in a turn, then the general wants to be in that box with the unit that's going to attack.
And are generals attached to units, or do they have an influence over the square that they're in?
That's a very good question. There are 2 sorts of generals. Well, there are several different sorts of generals, but generals are predominantly either attached to a unit, which means that they're with that unit as long as that unit survives. So an example would be Alexander with his companions. He wouldn't leave the companions and toddle off somewhere else on the battlefield. He was leading the companions. But there are in some of the more professional armies, there are detached generals, like many of the Roman generals, who would ride to the place where they needed to be. And they were able to move around the battlefield fairly freely to the critical places. They cost a little bit more, and they have their advantages.
I suppose the advantage is that if you're detached from units, then you can influence the 2 units that are in a square rather than just the one that you're attached to.
Oh yeah, the attached generals will influence the other unit in the same box as he as well. Right. But he can't. It's much harder for him to, if Alexander's with his companions, he can't get into a box that has a big unit of a big pike phalanx in it because of stacking. You can't move in. You can't have a normal unit and a deep unit in the same box. So they're a bit more restricted in terms of what they can do, the attached generals. But then looking at Alexander again, some generals can be heroic, and the heroic generals enable units to replay cards, to hit cards. When you play a card to hit and you don't get the 6 you need to hit in a melee, if you have a heroic general, he can replay 1 card per turn. that can be very powerful. Obviously, because if you miss with the first card and you manage to replay it and you hit the second time, that's obviously a good thing. Although they're about twice as likely to die in combat because of the way the general they have twice the chance of dying as the less heroic generals.
So you're saying there about generals dying. So that is a real thing, is that the generals can be targeted, or I'm guessing that if they're attached to a unit and that unit is taken off, then there's a chance that they can die as well. Yeah,
they particularly the heroic generals do really put themselves in harm's way. If you manage to hit a unit in a box that has a general with it, then the general has to save as well. Normal generals save on a 2, heroic generals save on a 3, but you get quite a lot of hits sometimes on boxes that generals are in. If the generals fail their save, then they're either wounded or killed. There's quite a high chance of losing, especially heroic generals.
Will that affect the activation of that command?
Yes, it does. Well, it does it in 2 ways. Firstly, there's a rule called out of command, and if you don't have a general, then everything needs to be a card 1 pip higher to activate it.
Right.
So command is really handicapped from that point. The other thing is that you lose the ability of the general to re-roll cards, which can be quite crucial. So losing a general is unfortunate, and I guess if you've got heroic generals that are going to lead your units in the fighting, you probably want to have more of them, smaller commands that you're less worried if you lose the general. It's a risk putting your general in harm's way.
So what benefits do you get from having the general attached to units, other than the actual reroll of an activation? Is there any other sort of combat effect they have?
No, basically the presence of a general with a unit enables it to, in the case of any general, to reactivate if it fails. If it fails to activate, it can have another go once a turn, or in melee. If you fail to hit and you've got a heroic general, then you can replay 1 to hit roll, and that's principally the role of generals in it. Probably the most important aspect of it, I guess, is to position your generals so that you can keep an advance going or get an attack going. Oh, the other thing that I haven't mentioned is generals help with rallying. So if you're trying to rally a unit, it's really advantageous to have a general in the box with the unit you're trying to rally.
Yeah, we'll come on to sort of rally morale in a little bit. So with the activation, I mean, the thing that I like about it is it's usually quite simple to get your troops doing that one activation, especially if you only need, sort of 2+ to do it. But if you turn over an 8 on one of your units, then you really have to think, because next time you try and activate it, you now need a 9 or 10.
Yeah.
So it's when you then, whether you try and reactivate them or what. So it's that whole sort of mindset of what can I do now? And there's always a chance of turning over an ace and losing, basically that command goes out to, basically fails, and then you're on to the next one. So I really like that mechanic of using cards. I mean, when I played it, we used these little wooden chits that you're selling.
Yes. Chits of war, I call them.
The chits of war, yes, which are little 25mm, sort of almost like poker chips that war bases do for you. And it was great because we had a little bag, and instead of turning over a deck of cards, turning over a hand, you just basically pull out a chit from the bag and put that down. And also means that you can sort of stack them, and it doesn't, it doesn't dirty the table, shall we say?
It doesn't take up as much room as a playing card either.
It is,
no.
Yeah.
It's really the chits. One of the reasons that I wanted to have the chits is for people that are playing with, say, 15mm figures on a smaller table. You can play a game with 15mm figures on a 4x3 table. The same, a good-sized game with a lot of figures that will look good. But then you're starting to get into problems when you're using the playing cards, because the playing cards are too big to fit in the squares, and you really need to leave the playing cards in the squares as a reminder of what units have got, because you can then see the progression of cards behind a unit. Its first card was a 3, its second card was a 5, its third card was an 8. It's very handy to have the cards remaining on the table. So that's partly why I got the chits done. I actually found I've really liked playing with the chits, and I can't explain quite why that is. I think, firstly, I suppose a lot of my games I photograph for my blog or sometimes for War Games magazines, and although I personally quite like, sometimes it looks really exciting when you've got like 40 or 50 playing cards heaped up on a table, and you can really see where the fighting has been furious and just follow what's happened in a turn really from where all the playing cards are. But other people don't like the look of it. There is always a point into the strongest. If you're using playing cards, at the end of every turn, all the cards are removed from the table. You've got a lovely clear table. It's a great time to take photos. But in the middle of a turn, you're going to see a lot of playing cards. With the chits are a nice neutral MDF colour, and you don't really notice those as much. And I'm kind of in two minds about it. I think most of my friends prefer the cards, but I quite like the chits.
I think for playing with just the chits, I don't think I'd like to play with the cards. I think I just like that whole it's very physical. You know, basically plunging your hand into the bag of doom to see what you get, what you pull out. You know, okay, it's
into the bag of doom,
because that's what happens when you pull out an ace.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the guys I played a game with recently had what could only be described as a small sack. It wasn't he was putting his hand in it right up to the elbow to get these chits out. And the chits are some people are making their own chits. I know there are some people that have made chits up, printed chits off on a green background, olive background that blend nicely with the table. Personally, I quite like the normal MDF colour. They stand out enough from the table that you can pick them up at the end of a turn and chuck them back in the bag, or see where your ammo chits are. Because if they're exactly the same colour, then they blend into the table and you won't be able to find the little blighters.
Okay, just a quick note on this, and something that, especially when you say, you chuck it all back in the bag or what have you.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're using chits, do you use the same bag? Do you use one bag aside, or is it the same with cards? Do you use a communal deck, or do you have one deck aside, or how does that work?
Usually with cards, we have one of the double decks on each side, i.e. 80 cards on each side with different coloured backs. Now with the chit, obviously most people are buying the chits, and the chits are all MDF coloured. So there's a danger that if you have two players using the chits, they're going to get mixed up, and one side will end up with 120 chits in his bag and the other side will only have 40. So in general, if people are playing with the chits, I'd recommend just using the one bag of chits and just passing it backwards and forwards. It's by no means difficult to do, and I've played quite a few games using the chits. I usually use a little a bowl with sort of steep-sided bowl to draw them out of, hold it up so I can't see what's actually in there, stir them around a bit and pull one out. Pass it backwards and forwards to my opponent when he has to draw chits to save for his units as I hit them and shoot them and melee with them.
That's interesting from that side of things, because here we go. Here we go on the rules of chance. But playing that way actually does affect, however slightly, the chances of, obviously there are only a certain number of aces, there are only a certain number of particular numbers in there. So if you're playing with one communal set of chits as opposed to your own deck, it is actually affecting the chances of drawing particular cards, isn't it, or drawing particular numbers through us.
Yeah, I suppose if you were playing a turn and someone you could already see there were 5 or 6 aces on the table, then you'd probably think, well, the chance of me drawing another ace at this point is markedly lower than it would normally be. However, as you get on into a turn, you're probably failing on things, aces through 6s or 7s, because most of your units, by the time you get to the halfway point in a turn, will have 6, 7, 8 value chits on them already. So it doesn't really matter.
Right.
it's possible that if you had a super genius with a brain like a supercomputer, then he could garner a very slight advantage from it. But I don't know. I don't think you would get much benefit from it. If you felt it was a problem, you could always chuck another 40 chits in and have a bag with 120 chits in it. Or I mean, they're cheap as chits.
Oh, nicely done, sir.
And we've got other chits for the ammo markers. They've got dinky little arrows on them that I really like, because unusually units into the strongest have ammunition, and this is because I wanted to. I don't like those games where the light infantry are hanging around at the end of the battle, still shooting things from the sidelines with great effectiveness. Into the strongest, you do often fairly quickly run out of ammo, and then your light infantry units are less effective. Although they can carry on firing to some extent, they're not as good after they've run out of ammo.
Well,
right, so at that point, they're kind of having to scavenge around for for stuff that they've used previously, or what have you.
They can resupply with ammo from a small. You have an ammunition reserve in your camp, but it slows down their rate of fire, and eventually the ammunition reserve runs out, and then there won't be any more firing anymore at all, and there's less that they can do from that point onwards, really. They're really earlier on in the battle, or maybe out on the wings.
This is something that, again, we noticed because each player had like a baggage area, and one player had spent the points to buy sort of like, I think he had like 4 or 5 extra ammo points in his baggage area. The other one only had 2. And, halfway through the game, the player who had the less baggage points, he basically spent all his ammo. Again, that just added another little dynamic onto the game of, okay, well, they're suddenly neutralised all of his, a big chunk of his bow-armed troops and his missile-armed troops are pretty much nullified.
Yeah.
Again, through bad planning, which is a nice little concept.
Yeah, I think it's quite important in, obviously 100 Years War games that there is some restriction on ammunition supply. I mean, in the games we play, there usually tends to be a fairly exciting point when the British are about to run out, the English are about to run out of arrows. It's a question of whether the English run out of arrows before the French run out of knights. And in a lot of games, the longbowman could carry on firing all day and all night, whereas the running out of ammo reflects the physical limitation of the number of arrows that they've actually got, and also the fact that they're tiring from firing the said arrows over a long period of time. So I think it's a fairly neat mechanism. It doesn't slow the game down any. Units have these little ammo chits stacked behind them, and the poles deplete and as the game goes on. There's one other sort of chit as well, which are what we call stratagems, which make no two battles quite the same. They allow you to do things like hide a unit in ambush or send a unit off on a flanking manoeuvre. Sometimes one of your units gets lost off the battlefield and turns up to probably the mutual surprise of both sides at some point in the battle. And other cards that affect play, like the stratagem cards, some of them have the equivalent of the anti-elephant devices, caltrops, you can throw down at one point. There's another card that when the enemy kill your general, you play the Patroclus card, and it turns out that wasn't your general, that was the general's best friend, dressed up in the general's armour, trying to save the general by appearing to be him. So there's all sorts of bits of chrome, if you like, on the game that are quite fun and often quite hilarious.
We covered very briefly combat.
Yes,
but it'd be nice to sort of go into that in a little bit more detail, and also what you've done to add a bit of period flavour to different types of troops. Oh
yes, okay. Well, let me just run back to the combat again. Okay. So
hang on a second. Before we go to combat, we talked an awful lot about activation, but we haven't actually talked an awful lot about movement.
Right. Yes. So you
good point. Well made.
let's say
So before we go into combat, how did we get there in the first place?
Okay, so in the first instance, let's think about an infantry unit. So it's in a box or square, and there are eight squares around it. If it wants to go straight forward, that's a normal activation, and it does that on anything but an ace. If it wants to go diagonally forwards, or move sideways, or retire directly to its rear, that's a difficult activation, and it needs a card 1 pip higher. So the first time it activated, instead of needing a 2, it would need a 3. So there's twice the chance of it failing. So in general, you want to be going straight forward rather than doing, heading off to one side, because you've got twice the chance of failing. If you want to be doing difficult activations, it's great to have your general along so you can replay a card. So an infantry unit is moving 1 box, except when it's doing a march move. And when you've got no enemy units near you and no enemy units that are currently in a position to charge you or shoot at you, you can move 1 extra box. So that enables you to move your reserves up or shift troops from one flank to another. It's surprising how mobile troops can actually be. I remember one game where we had a Roman general who started on one side of the battlefield and rode right the way around the back of the enemy army using march moves and attacked the back of their other wing. And it's possible to do that with the march moves, especially if you've got a general there and you can replay the odd activation card. So most infantry units move 1 box, and typically they're going to want to go forward, but they can go other ways as well. They can go sideways or diagonally. Cavalry units can move 2 boxes. They can move either 2 boxes straight ahead, or they can move 1 box diagonally and then 1 box ahead from there, or they can turn and move 1 box to the side. Light cavalry units and heavy cavalry units all move 2 boxes. The light cavalry units have some advantages. They perform the difficult manoeuvres more easily. They don't have to get the extra pip on those. If a cavalry unit's doing a march move, it can go 3 boxes. So if you're playing on a 6x4 table, a cavalry unit in a single activation, if it's doing a march move, can go 18 inches. And bearing in mind that often units will do 2 activations or 3 in a turn, it's quite possible for a cavalry unit to move, say, 3 foot in a single turn, including perhaps a turning through 90 degrees as part of that. One of the things that people were sort of surprised and I think pleased about at the convention was we set the games up there, and in the second turn of the game, the melees were happening all along the line. You don't spend half an hour or an hour manoeuvring before contact. Really, you're getting in. Shooting will often start in the first turn, and the melee will be taking place definitely by the second turn. You get into the game very quickly.
Earlier you said that when you've got 2 units in a square, they have to be facing the same direction.
Yes.
So say you wanted to, say you're being threatened on the flank and you wanted to turn both your units to the flank. Do you then have to activate them both individually, or can you activate?
You can activate both units in a box to move together, which is good because instead of having 2 chances of getting an ace, you've only got 1 chance to get an ace to move both units. It's good to have 2 units in a square. You move along more quickly where you've got 2 units in a square. And to turn them through 90 degrees, you can turn them both together. If you've got 2 units in a square, one of them hasn't moved, but let's say the other one's just moved into the square and it's got a 7 pip card on it, then you could move both units together, but you'd need to exceed the pip value on both cards, so you'd need to get a plain 8 or more to move them both together.
Okay, so if you do only move 2 units together, or say both units are moved into the same square individually somehow, and then you wanted to activate that one square, you would then pick the highest activation number?
Yeah, you'd have to beat the highest number on of the 2 units. So it needs a little bit of thought sometimes. Or you could just activate 1 unit in the square. You might want to, if you've got 2 units in the square, you don't have to activate them both. You could just activate one of them.
But you can't have it so the one's facing, say the right angle, and one's facing to the front. They're both going to be facing.
They've both got to be facing the same way if they're in the same square. With regard to the right angles, there are things. If you happen to be the unit on the end of the line that is getting outflanked, there are formations. You can change formation if you're certain sorts of troops. Like if you're Romans, you can form an orbis, which means that your troops are facing in all directions. It limits you. You can't charge when you're in orbis, but you don't count as having flanks. There are different formations.
Right,
You can form a testudo.
Right, so basically there's, for want of a better phrase, different armies have different advantages depending on how well trained they are.
Yes.
And obviously that's reflected in the particular history of the army.
Yeah, absolutely. Often it's done by the type of unit that is involved. Your Roman legionary, for instance, they're more manoeuvrable because they were either semi-professional or professional. They're able to do the difficult moves, like moving sideways or backwards, without penalty because they've got great drill. Some of the Celtic war bands, on the other hand, they're penalised for doing the difficult moves. It's twice as hard for them to do the difficult moves as normal units because they're not very disciplined. They're very good at charging forwards, but they don't really like to do anything much more complicated than that.
So have you designed a sort of set of generic characteristics for different units
Yes.
that have little sort of movement tweaks or combat tweaks attached to them?
Yeah, there are, I think, gosh, now how many different units are there? There are about 35 different units.
Oh, crikey. So, just tell one or two then.
No, it's surprising. What I wanted to do was, I didn't used to have that many. I basically started off with effectively your Romans, your pike phalanxes, and your barbarians. And that didn't need so many different units. But because I want to cover a huge swathe of history from the beginning of the biblical period right through until around 1500, I had to allow for all the units there are. I spent a very happy day yesterday writing rules for war wagons.
Funny enough, that they were immediately sprung to mind. Oh yeah, all these different units.
Yeah.
Good old Hussite war wagons. Yeah.
Hussite war wagons. I mean, what a lovely, interesting weapon and tricky one to write into a set of rules because, of course, they go in one direction, but they fight in another direction. They fight to the flank. They move to the front and fight to the flank. So it's that really did require a surprising amount of thought. And then you have to think, what are they vulnerable to? They were very effective against cavalry because cavalry couldn't really get at them. So there are modifiers on the saving cards that you play. I haven't really covered this with you, but when your unit is hit, you play a saving card, and the different units have different saves. Roman legionary, the average Roman legionary saves at a 6, so he needs to play a 6 or higher card to save, whereas a barbarian warrior usually saves at a 7, so he needs to play a 7 or higher card to save. But there are modifiers on the save depending on your tactical situation. So if you're stationary infantry uphill being charged, then you get a +1 on your save. Some types of armour give you saves as well. It's a lot simpler than it sounds. It does. What I have tried to do is to reflect the tactics that you needed to try and reflect how a battle went and what units are advantageous attacking other units and why your infantry unit might want to stand on a hill and perhaps why one infantry unit is equipped with long spears because they're used to facing enemy cavalry and the long spears give them an extra save. Yeah. And that's why there are 35 different sorts of units. I had to originally I had scythe chariots, but then I needed to add light chariots, and heavy chariots as well. And within those different sorts of chariots for the biblical period, you can have different armaments. So some of them are armed with javelins, some of them are armed with bows, and some of them are shock chariots, that will just charge into the heart of the enemy infantry and try and flatten them. So there's you can pretty much, I think any of the ancient or medieval troops that you think you would be likely to see on a battlefield are now covered in the rules. I think War Wagon was the last gap that I perceived, and I filled that yesterday. Although they're not actually. That's something I should say. There's the rules that are at the moment. I've got an update, a free update that I'm going to issue to everybody that's bought the rules so far. I'm hoping in around 6 weeks' time that we'll have a few extra troop types. It's a bit more explanation. No, nothing very much has changed, but there's a lot more explanation. Where people have said, "Oh, I don't understand this," I've put in an example and perhaps a diagram. So that'll be coming out in about 6 weeks, and that'll be free.
Okay. So I think we covered movement now. I think we can cover combat quite quickly because it is fairly simplistic way the way you do it, and you have already mentioned it already. So it's basically you activate a unit to say you're going to charge another unit or you're going to shoot at another unit, and then it's just a standard turn over your dice or pull out your chit, looking for a roll of
basically
for shooting.
In gen, for most units, in melee, most units need a 6 to hit, but units that are light units or units that are disordered need an 8. For shooting, it's always an 8 to hit. Although close order bowmen and longbowmen, the English yeoman archers of Agincourt can actually play 2 cards, so they get 2 goes to hit on an 8. They're quite effective until they run out of ammo.
Yeah, and then
which they tend to do, should do about half an hour into the game.
Yeah.
Which again, I suppose, if you're turning over 2 cards, does that mean you're using 2 ammo chips?
That's right. Well, at the moment it's 1 ammo chip, but in the new version of the rule, the longbowmen when they play will play 2. Will use 2. They'll have an ammo allowance of 6, and they'll use 2 of those chits each time they fire. Perhaps I'm complicating by talking about the new version before it's released, but there were a couple of inconsistencies. If you had a camp, if you had an army that was half light infantry archers and half bowmen, they were using the same chit, but the bowmen were hitting twice with the chit that the light infantry were only hitting once with. And I felt it in the new version. It was nice to straighten that out.
I think that's quite a good rule because the thing with the classical Agincourt British bowman is it was almost like a wave breaking over of arrows. It wasn't they weren't just firing just one and hitting all the time. It was multiple arrows going off very, very quickly, and as the French said, it was like a storm when they fell. So they used a lot of ammo. My grown-up son and I always refer to it as Alvin Archers when you see that in a movie, like in the Lord of the Rings films, where the sky is literally blackened by arrows because they had a terrific rate of fire. I believe there could even be several arrows in the air while they were chucking the next one. They'd fire and fire and fire, and before the first one had hit, they'd have another 2 or 3 in the air. Remarkable. Yeah.
But yes, the in the new version, or in the update, I should say, the number of ammunition chits for the longbowmen will double, and they'll use 2.
Yeah.
It's effectively the same as it is at the moment, where they just use 1 at the moment.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
No, it makes sense because, as you say, it then balances out. So if you have bowmen and light infantry on bows in the same army, it means that the light infantry become effective, because otherwise it would be a case of why would I shoot my light infantry when I can be twice as effective with my bow?
And I wanted to rule that situation out. And there are there's one other weapon, organ guns in the later period. They fire off two ammunition in a go. There is some gunpowder artillery towards the end of the period, bombards and organ guns, which can be quite effective, but some of them are likely to blow up in the finest tradition of Warhammer.
Well, wasn't Agincourt the first battle that actually had a black powder weapon in it.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, that sounds possible. Well, what, was that a British one or a French one?
I think it was a French one. It was this very strange contraption. It had like about 5 different barrels or like 5 tubes on a frame.
Yeah.
And they used black powder and fired, I think it was small stones or something. But I'm sure there's something in my memory about the very first person to be shot by black powder in a European battle was at Agincourt. We shall have to check that one out.
I think that would be a...
I must admit, I think Agincourt's a bit early, but...
No, it stuck down. I'm sure Stephen Fry wouldn't have lied to me.
I'm sure.
I'm making no comment on that one. Dear listener, we will go away and check our facts.
Yes. There we go.
Yes.
Neil, you can check it out whilst we talk about finish off the combat. Okay, so you get a card, you score a hit. What happens then?
Yeah, you're right. You've played your card. If you've got a 6 or more, you've hit. Some troops, in some circumstances, can play 2 to hit cards. Charging knights in their first charge of a battle can play 2 to hit cards, so they get 2 chances to actually hit. If you're hitting an enemy flank, you play 2 cards, or the enemy hitting the rear of an enemy unit, you play 2 cards as well. The cards hit or they don't hit. It's very quick to know if they hit, because if you've got 6 or more, you've usually hit. There aren't any modifiers on the to hit cards. The modifiers, where there are modifiers, they're on the save, and they're there for the things you'd expect: stationary infantry uphill, certain sorts of weapon. Some troops are more effective against other troops. Cavalry don't like charging elephants. The elephants get a good save, and the cavalry get a worse save. There's just one table of combat modifiers. If you fail to save, then you become disordered. Now, light infantry only have 1 hit, so they're just removed if they fail a save. Most units, the overwhelming majority of units on the battlefield, have 2 hits, so a normal unit becomes disordered, and it fights less effectively thereafter. And if it takes a 2nd hit, it's destroyed. Deep units such as pikemen and Celtic warbands have 3 hits, so because they represent a lot of men, and you need to effectively hit them 3 times to kill them, and that's pretty much that. If the defending unit isn't killed, then it gets to hit you back. Perhaps you managed to disorder it. If you've disordered it, it needs an 8 to hit you, so it's less likely that it will hit you.
Yeah. And if the unit's taken off and there's no other units in the square, the attacker then
advances in.
Yeah.
Yeah, the attacker advances in, and it's very advantageous to have a 2nd line of units, because if you've only got a single depth line and the enemy break through, your line is only as strong as its weakest point. Once the enemy have broken through, if you've got no 2nd line of units with zones of control, the enemy unit that's broken through will be able to turn and start rolling up the line. Which makes your Romans, who fight in 2 and sometimes even 3 lines, very formidable troops, because they've got that strength in depth.
But it does make you think about how you set your troops out.
Yeah, it does. Particularly if you're fighting a Roman civil war game, one we've fought a lot is the Battle of Thapsus in North Africa in 46 BC. Particularly if your legionaries are less good. I'll talk briefly about veteran and raw troops. If your troops are less good, you really do need the full 3 lines deep, because the other side of more effective troops will hack their way through your forces in fairly short order, and you can't afford to have them break through. If they break through, they can either turn and start rolling your line up, or they can dash off and try and sack your camp. And losing your camp is not a popular thing with your troops.
One thing that we had, it was one when we played on Thursday.
Yeah.
We had one unit that was attacked simultaneously from the front and also from the side.
Yeah.
Um,
Doesn't sound like they're in a great place.
no, they were in a very, very bad place. And
Was that one of your units, perchance, Mike?
Yeah.
But the question I had is, okay, if they did the activation of the unit at the front first,
Yeah.
and they hit, and I sort of said, well, is there going to be any disadvantage for me defending when I've got enemy at the flank? And I think Mark said
that there isn't a disadvantage. What they should have done is done the flank attack first, because the unit that's hitting you in the flank, and okay, I don't know about the particular circumstances. Maybe it had moved.
they did actually. They literally just moved there, and I think they had like a 7 or 8 angle activation, but the one at the front hadn't been activated.
That's a difficult one because, of course, if it's attacking you in the flank, it gets to play 2 cards, and when you're attacked in the flank, you don't battle back, so it's a no risk strategy. But if they already had a 7 or 8 pip card on the unit, and they only had maybe a 3 in 10 chance of it activating again, it really is a difficult call to make. So I can see why they attacked you from the front first.
Yeah, because I was a bit sort of thinking, oh, actually, surely I should be like a minus on my save or something because I've got enemy to the side. But no, as you say,
it depends on the order really, in which the attacks are resolved. I guess in that circumstance, what probably happened was that the unit that was going to the unit that attacked you from the front arrived earlier, and the units coming in from the flank maybe didn't get there in time to attack you. They took too long to move up. If you want to sort of rationalise it.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. I just wanted to check we hadn't done it wrong.
No. It sounds like it. It sounds like it was right, and I think I understand why they did it the way they did it. I probably, don't know. Probably, to be honest, flank and rear attacks are so good because there's no risk to you, and you get twice the chance of the hit. Even if it was like a 7 or an 8, even then I might have gone with the flank attack first, even though there's a fairly small chance of it coming off. In an ideal world, they'd have a general with the unit that was doing the flank attack, so they could have 2 goes at getting the activation.
Yeah, we're not that good yet. Which then brings us on to the wonderful subject of victory medals. And
victory medals
and chocolate coins. So,
so I just want to say chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you've got 2 armies drawn up fighting each other. You need to be able to see who is with. Both players need to have a grasp of how far they are from achieving victory. And I hit upon the idea of introducing victory medals, which are coins. You can use pennies, or you could use MDF chits. Well, my 2 preferences are either to use replica Roman coins, because a lot of my games involve Romans. They're shiny and small and they look wonderful. Or to use chocolate coins, as I think you're alluding to, were used at the recent competition at Benson, which are also shiny and they're edible, of course. So, you can, not only do you take the coins off the enemy, but you eat them as well. It has a certain appeal. I was briefly rationalising earlier that it might be really good fun to actually play it with shots of vodka.
I think that's a fine idea.
Because not only would there be a big incentive to killing the enemy units in that you'd be taking shots of vodka off the enemy, but the stronger player that was achieving more kills would be naturally handicapped by the vodka he'd drunk, and it would act as a handicap helping out the player on the other side. But that's not what I've...
So basically, it acts as its own fatigue system.
Yeah. Yeah. A really effective player might not even see the game out on the system.
Yeah.
You have to be very small shots of vodka. But obviously, vodka...
And here was I thinking about playing with Maltesers. I mean, I'm so tame in comparison.
You could play it... vodka would be perfect if you were playing Lithuanian Tartars against Teutonic Knights or something like that, wouldn't it? You could go for themed alcohol for the different sides. So the Romans might be drinking wine, perhaps watered, and the Britons beer. I don't know.
Yes, I'm liking that.
Sorry.
So,
It was a slow morning.
Okay, every time you destroy a unit, you go and drink a pint.
It's not a game. I mean,
Hang on, I think at this point, I think we're turning into a completely different podcast.
it's not a game. I didn't want it to be a game. I wanted it to be a game where good generalship will give you a big advantage, but even the best general isn't guaranteed to win because there's a fair amount of luck in it, and it's wargaming is a social activity. And me and my mate that play it, we always drink a bottle of wine during a course of an evening's play, and with this system you can play the game. It's not a hugely cerebral game, although we've possibly been over talking it. A lot of this stuff follows really clearly, and you find yourself doing the right things without having to rationalise why you're doing them, and you can relax and have a few drinks and a bit of a laugh.
Yeah,
that's the kind of the psychology behind it, really.
So, with the morale system, like you say, there's two levels of morale, isn't there? You've got victory points for each command.
Yeah, basically they're kind of related. Victory medals, you've usually got around a dozen per army. It depends on the size of your army, and you lose one medal when you lose a light unit, 2 medals when you lose a normal unit or a general, or 3 medals when you lose a really big unit. And when you run out of medals, you've lost. Within that as well, though, within the commands have what we call victory points. And effectively, once you've lost about half of your command becomes demoralised and it can't attack anymore, and it's penalised in combat. And at that point, really, it has lost the will to live, more or less. You want to be doing a fighting retreat with it, while your other commands hopefully win the battle. So that's demoralisation. But really, it's mostly about the victory medals. It's surprising what high proportion of games end up with one side having 1 medal or 2 medals and the other side having no medals. A lot of games turn out to be really close.
Yeah, no, the one we played was it was seesawing all the way through. It was a really good game. So we've sort of covered the rules actually in quite a lot of detail there. What about army lists?
Right, so I've written, I think, somewhere between 45 and 50 army lists. And I basically write 1 or 2 army lists every week, and it's a bit of a... sometimes I write the army list that people have asked me for. I know such and such has got a particular army and he'd like an army list for that, so I'll write that one. But I've tried to also nail the most popular army lists. So I've done pretty much all of the Roman army lists that you'd want, because a lot of people have Roman armies. I've done the Celts, the Germans, the Carthaginians. Most of the pike armies are covered in... There's what I call a generic pike list. Later on, I'll be writing a lot of very specific lists for all the different flavours of Seleucids and Ptolemaics. So I've recently written half a dozen biblical period lists, and I, and sometimes with help from other people, have written a reasonable number of medieval lists as well. So we're getting there, and I'm adding, as I say, 1 or 2 a week. There's a lot to write. So if anyone is reading this and has an idea of what they think their army should look like for a particular period, particularly if they've got, some real knowledge of it, then I invite them to write a list and send it to me, and then I can basically doctor the list a bit so that it fits in roughly with the other lists in the free army lists that I've got in my shop, which we'll talk about in a bit, and we'll get it published, because there is a lot of army lists to roll out. Even the more famous, there are still quite famous armies that I've not done a list for, but I'll get round to them.
But one thing you have done, which is quite good in the rules, is you've given a breakdown of the different types of units with their hits, their ammo, their save, and their cost.
Yeah,
Because
there's a template.
yeah,
There's a template in the army list that people can copy and they can use to. They can write their own army list fairly quickly and get going straight away by themselves. Or you can make up a generic army if you want to do. We've messed around a bit with fantasy rules. You can make a generic army up from that. Go back to the RuneQuest. We had a very enjoyable RuneQuest game 3 or 4 weeks back where we fitted all the RuneQuest troop types into this system, and we used canon rules for mages, and it was really good fun.
we should talk about that because
I was going to say that's yes, that's immediately flagging something up.
oh yes. Do you have plans, in the future to have like a forum where people can share army lists and discuss things?
Yes, I do. I do, absolutely. I bought the URL at the beginning of December to set up a forum, and I've been playing catch up ever since, and I haven't managed to yet set the forum up. I've got a Facebook site. A lot of people are emailing me, and I'm replying to them directly, but I do need to get the forum done. The reason I haven't done it yet is partly because we're talking about sort of future developments on the rules. I'm trying to get this version 1.1 together with the extra troop types and the additional explanation, because I want to actually get a print copy of the rules out. At the moment, they're available as a PDF. It's a 70-odd page PDF that you can download. But there are some people that don't like PDFs, and that's absolutely fine. Those people want rulebooks, and they shall have a rulebook. So this is partly why I've been very busy re-editing a new version of the PDF that will, as I say, be coming out in about 6 weeks' time. That's going to form the basis of the print book, which I hope to produce before Salute. If I don't get it produced before Salute, it will come out shortly thereafter.
That's quite an aggressive timescale.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite an aggressive timescale, but I've got. I mean, it is essentially written. It's quite a. If you'll have seen Mike's got. I've probably sent you one as well. I think now the PDF. It's quite a substantial document as it stands. It's in pretty good shape. It's mostly. It's really only been a question of adding a couple of thousand more words in terms of these extra troop types and diagrams, and then it's going to be a question of getting it proofed and formatted and printed. I think it's still.
So, are you thinking of doing something like using something like Lulu for that, or something like that?
Yeah, I'm kind of in two minds. In two minds about it. It may be that I'm going to do a traditional. I'll do a traditional print run of several hundred copies, because I'm going to be at shows, and I'm sure I'll find. I'm talking to people about possibly distributing it at shows, and I'll probably be able to post them out. But for people, particularly in other countries, and it seems to be, it's sold quite well abroad. A lot of people in America. Someone was running a game at a convention in Denver recently using it. It's quite popular in the States and in several countries in Europe. Greece, funnily enough, the people there seem to really like it. So, for the people that are further afield, I probably might look at some sort of Lulu type solution. But I need to get it written first, and it's been taking quite a few hours every day to push it forwards. So I haven't set the forum up yet, but that's high on my list of to-dos. I talk about doing it every day, but something else. I do something else instead. So there's that. That's one development I've got coming on with it. Obviously, the army lists are taking a bit of time because I have to sort of research those and write those up, and I'm trying to get at least one done every week, and most weeks I get 2 done. The other thing is I haven't got much time to spend on it at the moment, but I have been thinking about rolling it out to other periods late this year, because I think I mentioned earlier, apart from ancients, my other passion is Napoleonics, and I had quite a big Napoleonic French army at the moment. I mean, it's a big army. I need to have a set of Napoleonic rules to use, and I'm inclined to adapt these. I think they'd adapt very well to Napoleonics. Slightly different mechanisms, but I've been doing a bit of research on that, and hopefully I'll be able to start writing that in the second half of this year.
That'd be interesting. Are you thinking of doing a sort of core level, or
The units, at the moment, I'm thinking of the units being battalions, and the units effectively would be battalions. So it would tie in with, most of my units are Perry-sized units, 36 infantry with some separately based skirmishers.
Yeah.
And the rules would have one of those units sitting in a square, or in line, one of those units might fill 2 squares. And the squares would be a slightly different. Well, without getting into too much detail, I mean, I think it will work. I think it will work very well for people who've got, say, an 8x4 table and to play a game with a lot of figures, as is my want.
that's a use for my 18mm figures anyway?
Yeah. It probably, to be honest, I mean, collecting 28mm Napoleonics figures is a really stupid exercise. 18mm is a great scale to be doing Napoleonics in. You can really do some of the biggest.
6mm rules. 6mm.
Or 6mm, yeah. I mean, this Blucher thing looks really good, doesn't it? With the what are the units there? Are brigades, I think, aren't they?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's quite a high level game.
Yeah, that would be a slightly different game to the one I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of doing probably a lower level game than that at the moment. But as I say, I'm just at the moment doing reading and a bit of research on it, so it'll be quite a long time before I formulate my ideas. I have a rough idea how it would work. Slightly different mechanisms to this one, but I think you'd be able to pick up the game from, if you played this game, you'd pick it up really, really quickly. It would have the same activation system, basically. I think it might be useful to have units at just one unit to a square. If for no other reason, that a lot of the units are really deep. In the Napoleonics, those battalions are quite deep. If you've got the Perry-based ones, as I and a lot of other people will have.
Yeah. So people who listen to this and are keen to pick up the rules, where do they get them from?
Okay, at the moment, I've got what I call the Big Red Bat Shop, which is my web shop, and that's the place to buy the PDF from. It's the URL is http://bigredbatshop.co.uk. But if you put Big Red Bat Shop into your Google engine, it will take you straight there. And I've got...
Okay, so as well as the rules, you get things like the tokens and all that sort of thing?
So basically everything is in there at the moment. There's the set of rules. There's the tokens, where you can buy all the tokens you need to play the game. And for people that really like tokens, there's an extra add-on pack of tokens. As of today, as of Saturday, I've added some replica Roman coins for use as victory markers. So that I've just sold my first set this afternoon from the shop there, and I think they're going to be quite popular because they look, if you've got a really nicely painted figures, all the benefits of chocolate are wonderful, but the coins look good too. And the other thing in the shop there are 5 or 6 free, what I call booklets of army lists. The army lists, the basic list, the 45 to 50 lists I've talked about this evening, grouped by period. And you can just download those for free and have a look at them and see what the army would actually look like. As I say, every week I add a couple more armies to the army list. And on the front of the blog, on the front of the shop, there's a blog which says what I've done recently. It'll say what the last army added to the, so you know when the list has been updated. Later on, a lot of that will happen on a forum. But as I say, I haven't been completely successful at developing the forum yet, but it will follow shortly. So Big Red Bat Shop is the place.
Big Red Bat Shop, and what sort of price points are we looking at?
The rules cost $9.99 wherever you are, or your local currency equivalent to that, and it's a 72 or 74 page PDF, about 33,000 words plus the diagrams and illustrations. The illustrations, I should say, the book is It's got a lot of really nice photos in there.
I was about to say it's got some very nice.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff is my own. I've collected from my own collection of figures, but I have a lot of friends in the gaming community, and I've managed to beg photos from most of those. So there are photos of some of David Imrie's stuff, and one of my local friends, Ian, his big 15mm armies are in there. There's some really nice pictures of figures in the book. I think it's quite important. One of the things I really wanted to do with the book was to write something that would appeal perhaps to young people in part, that would catch their eye. And I know one of the things that excites me about the hobby is a fine looking unit of figures. So I thought it was important that it was really well illustrated.
It does look nice. You've done a good job with the layout, and it's very well put together.
Oh, thanks.
There are good examples, basically where you need examples of things happening. There are good examples.
Yeah.
I mean, as we've been talking backwards and forwards, as you say, to a certain extent, at times it does seem that we've kind of been over talking it a little bit. It's less complicated than it
really is. When we get
Yeah.
together at one of the shows, I've usually got 6 or 8 people, 3 of whom might have played it, but 4 or 5 of whom would never have played it or seen the rules. And I start off by giving them a 15-minute run through the rules as we stand around the table, and I show them how the cards are played. They pretty well grasp that. And then for the next half hour, I'm running all around the table asking people's questions. But by the time we're an hour into the game, no one's asking me any more questions. They're all getting on with it. It's very easy to play. Oh, one of the things I haven't really mentioned, it's a PDF, so you can print it. That's absolutely fine. But if you play it on your iPad, it's got loads of hypertext links built into it, so you can zip around. If you
Oh, so it's very tablet.
yeah, it's written as a tablet-friendly thing. And when I play it at home, I just play it from the tablet because it's easier. Really, it's probably easier than having it as a printed out set of rules. Although one of the big things is when it is a printed out set of rules, I think you'll be able to see all the illustrations to the full extent of their loveliness. It's very tablet friendly.
Funnily enough, I've been using the PDF with the hyperlinks all the way through this interview, so it is very easy to use.
It's very easy to use, and I've written the rules in a way that I like to think they follow. In general, the rules work in a fairly linear way, so they start at the start, and as you read them through, it takes you through the different stages of the activations, and then on into movement, charges, shooting, melee, what happens after combat. I think they're quite. I hope that they're quite written in quite a logical way that people will be able to grasp.
Just to kind of explain to the listeners, as far one of my pet hates with rules is that your rules that either don't have a decent table of contents or don't have an index.
Yes.
Probably only over about a 20-page count.
Yeah.
When you're having to start hunting through for what happens in this particular situation, you're having to start leafing backwards and forwards through rules or what have you. On the PDF version, we have a wonderful table of contents, and everything is hyperlinked.
Yeah.
So page 3 of the PDF has this. Is basically the page you will always have open.
Yeah.
On your tablet, and you kind of go to that one, and obviously at the end of each section you have return back to contents and stuff. So it's wonderfully tablet.
And then if you're in a section and a term comes up that you're not quite familiar with, then you can just go touch on that term, and it will take you through to the section that explains that term. And then if you've got the right browser, you can just go back to where you were before. I owe that to Dr. Phil Hendry, who produced the Augustus to Aurelian rules. He had that in there, and I thought, what a brilliant idea. So, thank you, Dr. Phil Hendry, if you're out there.
Hello, Phil. Yes. I managed to speak to Phil for a while, but yes, that was one thing I really liked about his rules, and it's a great feature of any PDF rule. So it's really nice to see that in there.
Yeah.
And as being a huge fan of using technology, and as someone whose tablet is almost surgically attached to his hand,
Yes.
Well, the thing is, Simon, you must be doing something right, because Neil hasn't gone off by the fact that you've got a point system blood and tears.
I've just stayed away from that.
No,
I mean,
point systems.
Yeah,
That you don't. One doesn't necessarily have to use a point system. I'm kind of in two minds about them myself because, I don't. It's probably fairly rare for two exactly matched ancient armies to run into each other. Most of the time, one would have a smaller or greater advantage over the other. But I think they should put them there for people that need them and people that want them. And sometimes it's quite useful to, if you're doing a scenario, if you're, I play quite a lot of big battles that are based on historical scenarios, and it's quite handy once you've actually worked out what the troops are to just put the points in, and it gives you a bit of an idea about how balanced the scenario is actually going to be. Just a rough idea, that your Romans and your Pontics, although the troop types are very different, they're probably broadly matched because the points come out roughly the same. So there's uses for points, I think.
Fun enough, we haven't discussed scenarios, so I've just jumped to page 60.
Yes, scenarios. You're right, we haven't talked about the scenarios. Yeah, there are basically, I think, 10 scenarios in there. I don't want people fighting the same battlefield, the same battle twice over. Sometimes players have a particular way that they like to set their army up, and they like to set the terrain up in a certain way, and you could end up, if you have two players that were doing that, they'd all probably always be playing the same battle over and over again. The scenarios just mean, if you're using the scenarios, it's going to ring the changes between the different battles. The other thing, actually, again, we haven't talked about, is the terrain placement system. I'm really quite pleased with the terrain placement system. You put down about a dozen pieces of terrain on a battlefield, and then you put cards on them, and depending on where you've put the terrain and what cards you put on it, more likely than not it's going to be removed. So players lay out all this terrain at the start of the battle, and then they remove most of it. Or sometimes, though, the terrain just doesn't come off, and you've got this very dense, surprisingly dense battlefield. But in general, it comes off. So that's another thing to stop the games being samey.
Yeah, and you've also included sort of ideas for club and tournament games, and also the fantastic mega gaming.
Yeah,
we got a whole bunch of checklists. One of it is planning a break for lunch, which I think is and shopping.
Shopping, yeah. We've got that. I haven't really talked very much about the mega games, but I will be running. I'm doing a game at Partisan with the illustrious David Imrie, who paints the most beautiful figures, and we're going to have quite a lot of his most beautiful figures and quite a few of my not bad figures at Partisan in May. Before then, there's Salute. I'll be running a big game of To the Strongest at Salute, the Cremona game with all the wonderful trees and the river and boat. Yes. I'm doing a bigger version of that at Salute with a couple of friends. Mark Freeth from the War Games Holiday Centre is going to be doing that with me and some other friends as well. So that should be a big game. That's about 1,500 to 1,800 figures, I think. And then the other Partisan, possibly a mega game again, possibly a big one like Pidna again. Not sure what yet.
Actually, Michael, just saying, on the thing for mega gaming, the picture at the top of the page is actually of that table we were talking about.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it.
There's one moment where Callum Hall is quite dark, but there was a glorious moment when a single ray of sunshine bursts through and illuminated the centre of the battlefield, and I think you can see that in the photo. It's the one I'm thinking of. It's like a spotlight shining down on the...
Possibly the only time the sunlight ever got into Kellam Hall.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
more likely than not. But as well as that, I'll probably try and do a couple of tournaments. 6 or 8 tables. I'm trying to sort those out at the moment, see if we can fit them into the wargaming calendar. I might try and do try and get out around the country a bit. One in the Midlands, maybe one out west, because there seem to be a few of you playing it in the sort of in South Wales, and there's some people around Bristol as well that quite like playing it. So I would like to at some stage come out your way.
It's really been taken off here. There used to be a lot of guys who played Impetus quite a lot.
Yeah.
I think they kind of drifted off Impetus and they picked up these rules because they're finding them a lot better for tournaments because there's no gamesmanship in these rules. That's one of the key aspects. It is the rules don't get in the way. It's all about the tactics. It's all about having a bit of luck, but there's no messing around measuring wheels and arguments about how far you can move and all of that. It's very much laid out and perfect for tournaments.
Yeah, I wanted to write them without ambiguity, so there's not a lot of. Hopefully, there'll be very few circumstances where you have to say this isn't covered in the rules. We'll just flip a coin. Partly because of the grid, and partly because hopefully the rules cover pretty much all the circumstances. But of course, if you're running a tournament, you can always get me along and I'll be God. But a very fallible God, probably.
Yeah.
I've just realised we're doing this interview that a guy emailed me this morning with a question about the rules. And I told him totally, I've just realised I gave him the wrong answer. I must have been, I was quite tired this morning. I'm going to be hitting the emails when we come off here and just say, actually, I said such and such. Well, I didn't really mean that. But no,
what we've already heard is, we've already heard you're very pliable with wine or vodka.
Oh, yeah, very.
So there we go. Or even
Very, very corruptible. Yeah, they're pretty good for tournaments. The one we had at Benson the other weekend was really very relaxed, and there weren't. Actually, after the first round of games, I was playing because we had an odd number of people, so I pitched in to make the numbers even. In the first round of games, quite a lot of people asked me questions. In the second round of games, a few people asked me questions. And then in the third round of games, no one asked me any questions. I think they'd all kind of picked it up. That's the other thing about it. Because it plays... We were playing these games with about 2 hours. We allowed about 2 hours for the games. In the first round, about half the games were finished, were decisive one way or the other. But in the following two rounds, I think in each round, all but one of the games was decisive. In fact, one lot played it so quickly, the first game was over so quickly, they managed to play two games in a 2 hour period, which I thought was good going.
That's good. Anything else?
I think
yeah. It's been a great chat.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it a lot. I've enjoyed it a lot. It's been absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much for inviting me on to have a chat about it.
No, it's been great to have you, Simon. Thank you very much for coming on. And like I said, we wish you all the best with it. I mean, it sounds like you've got a lot of things coming up, and especially with print edition and everything planned for Salute. I mean, well, to say. Other than having your work cut out, it sounds like there's some interesting things, especially when we're looking at potential for fantasy versions and then moving to different periods and what have you.
Yeah, I think the only limitation really is the time it takes to actually redevelop the rules for the different periods, because the core mechanisms are very transferable. But you'll see other sets of rules coming out that will be close enough to this to be picked up quickly. And hopefully this year too.
That all sounds good.
Well, yeah, it does indeed. Well, as I say, thanks for coming on the show. It's been great.
A pleasure. Thank you very much.
We shall look forward to catching up with you at one of the shows this year. And in the meantime, as I say, it's about time I got this to the table. I'm sure.
Well, Dave will love this.
Yeah. I think you will. Yeah, I mean, yeah. If you can prize ourselves away from playing Sword and Spear, I think this will be. I think this will be another definite favourite, because it's one of those games that it's simple, it's elegant, and as you say, fast play when it actually means fast play.
Yeah.
Which depending on what rules you play, sometimes it's a bit of a novelty because some will say they're fast play and they really, really aren't. I've really enjoyed getting to grips with them, and I think you're really onto something here, Simon.
Well, thanks.
Wish you all the best of them.
Thanks very much, and I hope you have some great games with them.
Okay, take care, and so hopefully we'll catch up with you soon.
See you soon. Cheers. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that chat that we had with Simon Miller. I must admit, that kind of went on for a bit longer than I expected. Time flies when you're having fun, eh, mate?
Yeah, nice chat. Really, what a nice guy.
Indeed.
Yeah, really keen, really knowledgeable. And it didn't seem to drag. We were just having a really good chat about stuff.
Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that, and it didn't go on too long. Apologies if this is a little bit longer than some of you normally like your shows, but I try to edit out as much as I can. I'm really loath to cut bits out just for the sake of keeping things down to, under 2 hours or what have you sometimes, especially if guests are really, really good.
Yeah.
Simon was really, really good, so apologies if this has gone on a bit longer than we normally do. Hopefully it's worth it and you've enjoyed it so far. So we just thought, as continuing the show, we'll just kind of finish off a couple of comments and a couple of things. And typically there's always a couple of bits you can rats, I forgot to ask Simon this, or what have you, or just a couple of comments that we want to make. So basically, I think from where I am, generally a really nice set of rules. There's only one thing I don't like about it, which is the turn sequence. I don't know, I just don't like I Go You Go anymore. And that, as I see, is the only thing that's wrong with them. It's certainly if you're playing multiplayer, so you've got multiple people on one side, on either side, I can certainly see why you keep it I Go You Go, because at least it keeps everything simple, and it does mean that you can have several people moving at the same time. Okay, it's all on one side, but it does mean that as far as that's concerned, it's all fairly self-contained, and you haven't got one person making a move and everybody else having to hang around until that happens. So I can see why, especially in a multiplayer game, why you do it. However, if you're playing 1v1, personally, I think I'd look at changing the turn sequence.
I think you can really easily do it just by either alternating the commands. So you activate a command and then I activate one, and then you do another one, and vice versa. Or you could possibly borrow an idea from.
It's not the impetus way of doing it.
Yeah, well, you basically dice off to see who gets to activate the next command. So I mean,
except of course you wouldn't use dice because it's a diceless game. So that would be drawing chits out of the bag of death.
Yes, the bag of death, as we like to call it.
As we now like. Yeah. Didn't I see that you kind of ordered one off our friendly neighbourhood dice bag lady?
Yes, yeah. Well, I thought I do have a dice bag from the dice bag lady, which is full of dice, and I just thought, I do need to have something to take these chits out of. I'll have a little chat with Annie and ask her to make me a nice second dice bag, because you can never have too many dice bags.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
And actually, as a precursor, we will be chatting to Annie in the not too distant future.
Yes, we need to get her on fairly soon, because we have bumped her off now for Spartan, and she wasn't happy. She holds a grudge, that woman.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
I'll have to be extra nice to her when we speak to her.
Yeah, I mean, she'll probably end up beating me again in numerous games.
What? So no change there then, mate?
No, not at all, no. She is my wargaming nemesis. I've honestly never beaten her in a game. Even when I know the rules and she doesn't. Even when I cheat outrageously and she doesn't.
Now that is worrying.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, yes. That is my one criticism, if you call it that, of the rules. and that's so as such. It's a fairly minor one. I mean, some people might turn around and say, "Well, criticising the turn sequence. The turn sequence is fairly fundamental in the game."
No, it's not. I don't think they are anymore, especially in these kind of games. But especially with games where you're activating units and doing everything with that unit and then going on to the next. The turn sequence pretty much becomes another aspect of the whole, the whole feel. So it's easy to swap that bit out.
And of course, actually, what that the other thing that does is that it makes an even more strategic decision about what you want to do first. What's your most important move? It actually gives you an extra decision to make, as opposed to thinking, well, all being well, I'll get to activate everybody anyway. But obviously with the chance that you may draw an ace. And fail completely. But as I say, that it just gives you that one extra decision, which actually I don't think is a bad thing. And of course, it as I say, it adds a little bit to the chaos. And so I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you could suggest to Simon is that can we have this as an official alternative rule? Yes, maybe when we meet up, we'll. Unless of course he's listening to this.
I suppose the other thing is if you do that sort of alternate activation, then each player will have to have their own stack of either cards or chits. Because what you do is when you do the I go you go, you do all your activations, then you pick up all of the chits you put up that you played, you put them back in the bag, and you literally pass the bag over, or you pass the deck of cards over to the opponent, and they start.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Or alternatively, you get double the amount of chits and you put more in the bag. So effectively, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know though, because obviously if you do that, then that starts affecting abilities.
Yeah, when we played it, it wasn't a problem because
I go, you go.
Yeah, it really wasn't. It was because it is so fast. You are always reacting to attacks. You're doing your saving turns. I mean, when we played it, we actually used the chits for the movement activations, and then combat we did with dice. So there was, and it probably slowed down the game a little bit, but it was only a small game. We played on a 4x4.
Yeah, but at the same time, and this is something that I'm thinking. You play it with dice, but surely then, because actually you're not using the deck, and that deck has multiple functions, surely then you're actually affecting the game, because you're then affecting the chance of certain cards coming out, because you're actually not drawing the cards when you're in combat.
Yeah, you are a little bit, but we didn't really see that much of a problem. When you got 80 odd chits in there, and we had 2 commands, so it was only about 10, 15 chits coming out of the bag at any one time. So even if you have 3 or 4 combats going on in a turn, that's only another 10, 12 chits. So I mean, it wasn't as if we actually ran out of chits ever.
No. Well, no. I mean, I suppose that's the point. But
and also, I think what a lot of people do is. Well, actually, no. I was thinking, but I know that one of the guys did try using the chits. But what they did is after they did the combat, they just threw the chits back into the bag. Yeah. So it was only, it's okay. Mathematically, it will have a choice, but are we really that worried that much? Well,
I mean, I just. It's just a thought, and obviously considering it's this whole dice, this whole card deck is a factor in the game, and and one would argue that I suppose actually using dice is more random because you're never going to blank a side off a dice, are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas so there's that particular argument, but the flip side of the coin is that if you're using a card activation system, go with the card activation system. But maybe that's just me being pedantic.
I think it's because the guys that I was playing with, we kind of like rolling dice. It was literally as simple as that. It was a case of,
Mike, what you're telling me is that this game hasn't got dice, so it's not for you.
to be honest with you, I really like it. This is the odd thing. When I first got the rules and I was reading through them, I was thinking, okay, we're moving into grids and it's all card based and there's cards everywhere. I'm not sure if I'm going to like this. It sort of felt a bit board gamey and stuff. But once I started playing it,
as we mentioned during the interview, and actually it was something. It was a conversation that we actually had at Partisan, with Simon Conrad. I had a look. I went, it's really a bit of a board game, but shush, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
and it is. But
it works.
I'm not knocking it for that at all. I mean, well, as Simon explained, it's done in that way for a very particular reason, and for the reasons it's done that way are very good. But it's a darn sight more complicated, especially when you come to troop types. How many troop types have you got in a game? It's for that sort of thing. Oh, it's definitely a board game. Just because movement and then you got cards rather than dice rolling. So there were some aspects of it which is quite board gamey.
Yeah.
No, it's a war game.
Yeah, and that's the thing that grabbed me when I started playing it, because I really went into it thinking, I'm not sure, but I loved it. I loved every single part of the game, because by using the grid, it's like Excelis, which also was grid based, but it stops you going into the metagaming of where you position your figures to get the most advantage, or basically playing the rules to the most advantageous.
It stops that micromanagement. Excuse me a second. You moved that unit a half a centimetre too far.
Yeah.
Or you haven't moved that unit not far enough. Therefore, you just left it 3 millimeters outside the charge range.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's you can't move through that little space because there's a wood there, and you're gonna go a millimeter over it, so that's going to slow your movement down. Little stupid things like that, and you end up by using the grid system, you end up concentrating more on the tactics and more on your positioning as a whole and the zone of control of the whole army, not just on the individual units.
And I mean, let's face it. That was the one thing we really liked about Excelis. I mean, forget the side of things with the with the moderated combat and what have you. Just that freedom to kind of go, right, okay, let's worry about the big picture. It's like worrying about the movement of individual unit. It does make for a bit of a different feel. Yeah, if you're used to playing the majority, let's face it, the majority of Ancients games, where and as I said in the interview, the amount of space that is devoted in most ancient games to rules about movement, it is quite time consuming. It is probably the most gamey aspect of an awful lot of rules, and it's potentially part of the game that is exploited the most by those players that wish to do so.
Yeah.
So taking that out completely just changes the dynamic of the game, doesn't it?
It does, and also what I found from playing it is it matters an awful lot to have a second line. Whereas most ancient games, you just have one long line. You basically fill up the table from one side to the other with a great big long line, and you move forward. And you basically try and get a gap, and that's about it. But in this game, because you're limited on the amount of frontage that you've basically got, by having it makes tactical sense to have second lines there. To plug gaps or to stop breakthroughs. And again, it's a different style of play, but it works. And I found that skirmishes work really well in this game, because you can interpenetrate, and having your skirmishes out front means you can pull them back if they're attacked. So they work really well, and it's very simple.
Yeah, but of course, as has been mentioned, at the same time, you haven't got super skirmishers. You haven't got these guys that run for the whole time throughout the length of the battle, and constantly end up worrying. You constantly have to worry about that unit of bowmen or that unit of javeliners, because sooner or later they're just going to expend all their ammunition, and then at that point you just don't have to worry about them anymore, which is a level of realism which a lot of rules just don't worry about. I mean, okay, some of them kind of go, right, okay, after a certain point, skirmishers, don't worry, and also, I mean, you've got certain systems that as soon as skirmishers are impacted by any other sort of troop, they basically disband. So you get that sort of mechanism. But as I say, I don't know, it's just a different way of doing it, which is quite cool.
Yeah, and it's really good. I mean, there is one rule we forgot to mention, and that's heroes.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so heroes, they're single figures that you attach to units, and you can use them anytime during a combat. But what happens is they allow you to replay a missed to hit card or chit, whatever you use.
So they're a little bit like generals, but not quite as powerful.
Yeah, so no, because generals allow you to reroll or to replay, reroll or replay an activation roll. Heroes,
it's combat. Yes.
It's combat, but once they're used, they're taken off the table.
It's one of these, once only, once only things. Yeah. So it's almost like you're assuming that hero is there. They take part. It's almost like they take part in this particular bit of combat and end up sacrificing themselves as part of the combat in order to for something to happen.
Yeah, I think it was a bunch of.
But at the same time, they also they don't count towards victory, do they? So
no.
So it's not a problem. It's not a problem doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, some armies are really useful to have them. Others maybe not so much. But that's a nice little rule. Enemies you can base up in any spare figures you got hanging around on little pennies or whatever, and away you go.
I can see them being very useful on things like things like war bands and stuff against the more disciplined troops.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we had our game, we had a warband army versus an early Romans army. So it wasn't historically correct, because I think it was the ancient British rules versus the early Republican Romans, which obviously didn't meet, but it's two armies that we had. So the ancient Brits had four heroes scattered around the army, whereas the Romans only had one, and that was with some cavalry. And it works. It just gives you a little extra twist, and you have to decide where you attach them, because they don't move. They are just attached to a unit.
Oh right, okay. So it is very much a case of you've got to really consider about what units that you may end up wanting to have a reroll at a particular point. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's a nice little mechanic. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that one.
Yeah. I mean, on the whole, it's a really good set of rules, and the fact that I got sword and spear armies allows me to use the same army, two different sets of rules. Each game gives me a slightly different feel.
And cool. I mean, that was one thing that we didn't say an awful lot about, and that is one thing that you really, so many Ancients games require that both armies have equal. Basically are based exactly the same way. Okay. And because of the way movement mechanics work and what have you, that's one of the premise of an awful lot of games. As Simon pointed out, in this game, actually, because essentially it's just it's a unit, it's an element. It actually doesn't matter.
No.
I mean, aesthetically it does, if you're bothered on that sort of thing, yes, it does. But yes, you can have a situation where you can have one player that maybe has a 28mm Ancients army based for impetus or based for DBA, and then you've got another army. You've got somebody else who's got an Ancients army that they use for WAB or something like that, and there is no problem. You don't even have to use Sabo basing.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, from movement point of view, it's easier, but there is no issue with using differently based armies as long as it's a case of okay, that's a unit, that's a unit. I'll stop because yes, I'm obviously talking complete heresy. But it was just a thought. If that's just what you have to hand, but as I say, it really doesn't matter. And as has been hinted, you can play this game without figures at all.
Yeah.
So actually, it's say as long as you have your grid, it is the ultimate travel war game, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, you can just have as long as you've got your grid on you can have it on a folded piece of paper, on a little bit of map that you can roll out. As I say, I mean, especially with those. As I was talking about, the battleground historical warfare stuff, or even cards that you make up yourself. What have you? It just makes for a great little set. A type of game you could play absolutely anywhere.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, I mean, I can't even think I have anything else to say about them. I really enjoy them a lot more than I first thought, and the fact that Simon's working on a Napoleonic game really interests me.
Yes.
I like the mechanics that he's got in there, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, I'm gonna have a little play with some fantasy figures as well because I got my 5 fantasy armies.
Shocking indeed, horror.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but as you say, this is a conversation we've had before, and that essentially with a few extra bits and pieces, fantasy is just an extension of an ancients game.
Yeah.
Because even magic. Actually, the majority of the time, magic effects in games is just like missile fire. It's just a form of artillery, effectively. For most, any spells that are destructive in nature, anyway, certainly. And as you say, you really got to worry about big monsters and flyers, and you're about there, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see how we get on with it. I'm as I say, I'm not actually to play these yet. I think you're right. I think Mr. Luff will like these. So I'm going to convince him that yes, okay, we'll try and play more than one set of rules for a particular period because
Ooh.
yeah.
Oh, he won't like that.
I can see a little bit of resistance. So, okay, look, just give it a go. They're not that difficult.
Well, the thing is, they're different fields, and that's what I love about this game. You can play Sword and Spear, which I still think is my favourite sort of ancient medieval game out there for this sort of scale. It's a really tactical, really fun game. These are also very tactical, but they're tactical in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think it's that little mind shift that really makes these fun. So I'm not saying that one's better than the other because they're not. They're both equally good, and I equally like them. But I like them. I like playing them for different reasons. It's like it's whichever one scratches the itch today. But hey, same armies, same terrain. It's literally the difference is one's got a grid on the base, the other one hasn't.
Indeed. And it's not that difficult to get to sort things out. I mean, Simon suggests various different ways of marking grids out on existing tables, and obviously you can get hold of commercially available mats these days that people will put grids on for you, all sorts of stuff. So
yeah.
Not difficult to do, and would recommend that you have a look at these. You may be surprised. You may kind of think, "Oh, it's a board game." No.
It's not.
No, it's no. As I say, it speeds up the bits that are important, while at the same time giving you all the same strategic decisions that you would have to make if you're playing a board game.
Yeah.
So best of both worlds. And as I think I said, essentially, think about it as a war game where you save an hour because you're not measuring movements.
It's an save on the arguments as well.
Well, yeah, well, quite, yes. Yes, the arguments of they're never in charge range. Oh, yes, they are.
Yes.
Line of sight, etc., etc., etc. Yes. Oh.
Yeah. Very clever.
Indeed. Well, I think that's about it.
Yeah.
Mate?
Yeah, I think we're done.
Yeah. So all that's left to say is thank you everyone once again for listening. Hope, as I said, we hope you enjoyed it. We hope you found it useful. So until next time, I'm Neil Shuck.
I'm Mike.
And thank you again. And take care. Happy gaming. We'll speak to you very soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you want to know more about Meeples and Miniatures, there are several things you can do. First of all, you can visit the website at www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. If you want to contact the show at all, you can email me at neil@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. You can follow the show on Twitter. Simply look for M&M Podcast or click the follow us on Twitter button from the website. We also have a group on Facebook. That's the Meeples and Miniatures Podcast Fan Club. Again, follow the link from the website. And finally, if you want to help us to support the show, you can always donate to the podcast by clicking the PayPal button on the donate page, again found on the website. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed the show. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.